Today in the EU, what Roswall's Clean Industrial Deal means for environmental policy. Today, the Commission unveils its rebranded Green Deal, and at Euractiv we got a look at a draft last week. It painted a less than green picture of Europe's industrial revival. The focus on cutting red tape is taking priority over crucial environmental protections. And this comes at a time where there's still unresolved issues around the regulation of forever chemicals, waste management across the EU, and sourcing of critical materials. Issues at the heart of Commissioner Jessica Roswall's mandate. So what are her true priorities? Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Giada Santana, and this is Today in the EU. Today, I'm joined in the studio by Euractiv's environment reporter, Barbara Machado. Hello, Barbara, and thank you for being with us.
Hello, Giada. Thanks for having me.
So, what's probably the Commission's most awaited policy package for the green transition is coming out today, the Clean Industrial Deal. Euractiv got its hands on a leak of the document already last week, and we saw what it looked like, what it meant for environmental protection. What did you make of it?
So the question is not what does this do for environmental protection, is more how can we ensure that there will be environmental protection despite the Clean Industrial Deal's goals.
Oh, wow.
Because on the one hand, of course, deployment of clean energy is super important to reduce emissions, to reduce air pollution. So this is an important objective, but we have to look at the bigger picture. We have to look at the type of projects that leads to this. So the Clean Industrial Deal version that we looked at is focused on cutting permitting times for deployment of renewable energy, grids, and energy storage. So here the main purpose, of course, is producing clean energy. But at the same time, these projects can have environmental impacts that cannot be disregarded. And the Act also wants to further cut on permitting times for these projects, not only projects for renewables, but also for sourcing of critical raw materials. So we have to pay close attention to this because cutting down environmental impact assessments, for example, can be worrying.
And you talked about it to Commissioner Jessica Roswall last week, right?
Yes, I did. And she basically mentioned that she's also involved in the defining rules for permitting.
One of the things that I'm involved in that is about the rules on permitting that kind of industry together with the member states, because of course it's also member state competence. It's not EU member states as such. And in that decisions, you need to have this balance as always to balance between all different interests.
Yeah, you talked about it to Commissioner Jessica Roswall last week. She's the Swede involved in the choreography of one of the commissioners involved in the choreography around the Clean Industrial Deal. And her mandate specifically covers environment, water resilience, and the circular economy. I listened to your interview with her, and throughout, she paired two key objectives together, green goals and competitiveness. She says she doesn't see a contradiction.
I've been very clear all the time that I don't see a contradiction between high environmental standards and competitiveness.
Do you?
I see a potential contradiction, yes, because the reality is that we do have here a suggestion of cutting further permitting times for renewables and implementing the Critical Raw Materials Act when these also already sets faster permitting. And what this means is cutting environmental impact assessments. Mm-hmm. And these are processes that are very important and that take time. And also sourcing of critical raw materials is known to be potentially highly polluting of soils, waters, and air. So we are already very used to this talk of it is possible to compatibilize environmental protection with competitiveness.
Yeah, it's not news.
Exactly. But what we really need is to know how will the Commission ensure this on the ground. And the reality is that the Commission doesn't want to be perceived as an environment police, and it really can't monitor all projects that are taking place in each and every place. So the Commission must be very firm from the start on the way these projects are carried out. Because, for example, on critical raw materials, we are talking about extractive industries that can have potential impacts on water contamination, air pollution, and soil contamination. So
yes, we definitely talked about it on the podcast, specifically regarding the case of Serbia, where protests have been ongoing for months to protest lithium mining projects. Brussels is definitely interested in striking a deal with the country, for instance. So how is Roswall planning to manage cooperation with international partners that do not share the EU's pledges to environmental protection?
one of her main points is that we need to diversify access to resources through those partnerships. And when we discussed that, first, I talked to her about the upcoming omnibus package that will also cut rules on sustainability reporting. And the truth is that one of those pieces would be key for ensuring compatibility with environmental rules and human rights in these explorations with third countries. But if the EU is slashing those rules, then that may be compromised. And that's why I put that question to the Commissioner, and she stood firm on the importance of the omnibus package. But she says that it will be in those agreements with these third countries that the rules should be set.
And what I said in Munich, which I strongly think, and this comes to secondary raw materials, that because we also know, as you say, that we are not going to be self-supplied. We need to have collaboration and cooperation with other countries. And I do believe that having more trade agreements with different parts of the world is important. And in these agreements, is, of course, from my perspective, really important that we have strong lines.
So the rules would be put in those agreements. Is that what you mean?
That is one thing that I think is important. That is also something that I think benefits also the high standards that we had within the EU, also when it comes to level playing field.
So, getting into the nitty-gritty of Roswall's mandates, the Circular Economy Act, it aims to boost the use of recycled materials as a substitute to newly extracted one. What's concretely on the table to boost circularity of the market?
In reality, this clean industrial deal didn't give much yet on the future plan for circular economy. So it sets mostly the objectives. So a higher rate of recycled materials,
right?
Boosting demand, and has some plans for transnational circularity hubs to boost economies of scale in recycling, and also wants to limit exports of critical raw materials waste, so to keep it more within Europe. But it doesn't really set the vision for how are we going to solve the issues. There are structural changes needed. And I think Environment Commission didn't want to commit to anything yet.
Yeah.
I asked her whether she would do this by putting forward more regulation, or because she mentioned before in her speech in Munich that she wanted to fix the circular economy market with smart policies and the right incentives. So I asked her, okay, but will we put forward more regulation? And she,
what are the smart policies?
Exactly, but she didn't want to refer to that yet. And of course, she doesn't want to commit to a new regulation in the moment when she's trying to cut regulation.
So when you say structural changes are needed, what are you referring to?
What I'm referring to is that most member states are set to fail on their recycling targets for 2025. So despite all of this legislation that we have enforced, the reality is that we are not getting there. We are not complying with our recycling targets.
And what does the sector say?
The sector complains that recycling capacity and machinery is very expensive, and the Competitiveness Compass actually floated the idea of enabling investments in this regard. The sector also complains that we keep importing very cheap materials from third countries, that we are not certifying the plastics that we import, and that all of this creates competitiveness disadvantages vis-a-vis European European recyclers, the European sector. But also the reality is that despite the harmonized legislation we have, there are differences in the way that member states collect, recycle, and invest in direct investments to promote recyclability. So she said that they are now having structured dialogue with stakeholders to see what exactly do they need to fix this market. And I believe we will only really have the answers when the Circular Economy Act is put forward. And the Circular Economy Act is only expected in 2026.
I mean, it seems that even the goal of having a single waste market is really far away right now.
Yes, completely. And also, as the commissioner said, we are still in a linear economy. Despite all of our legislations, despite all of our targets, we are living in a linear economy model. And that's what this commission aims to change.
At the same time, I see the argument for cutting red tape, because if regulation has not helped so far getting us to the goals that we have set for ourselves, as you've pointed out before, then cutting regulation could help the market step in and fix what the state hasn't been able to.
The big problem and challenge the EU have, that we have too complex rules and regulation, and the reporting burden is too heavy. That is something that makes us not as competitive as other regions. So that is something that we need to do. We need to do our homework.
Is cutting regulation going to help us there more than adding regulation at this point?
I think it really depends on what regulation we are talking about, because to stimulate the ramping up of a secondary market, what we need is incentives that allow our economic tissue to create these materials, and that these materials can compete with foreign materials. And for that, if there is no incentives to move that way, then investment also won't be directed that way. So some sort of policy that signals this is where we where we had to, is needed.
Speaking of needed regulation, one of them that's been awaited by civil society for a while is on PFAS, or forever chemicals. Roswall's mandate extends to the chemical industry, and the situation regarding PFAS is quite alarming. I mean, we don't really have an EU-wide measurement of all forever chemicals, but estimates say that at least 23,000 sites all over Europe are contaminated, and more than 1% of those are seriously contaminated. So what was the Commission's stance? Where are we going? Are we going towards more regulation on this? Are we going towards, more investment into cleaning up already the mess that PFAS have done to the environment?
When I discussed PFAS with the Environment Commission, I tried to have some sort of commitment on whether she would put forward a ban on PFAS out or not. Because the European Chemicals Agency is currently assessing this. It will make a proposal, and then the Commission decides whether it puts it forward or not. And she didn't want to commit on putting this proposal forward.
What I commit to is what I've also said earlier. I mean, for me, it's really clear that we need clarity when it comes to PFAS. It's a huge problem with PFAS around the globe, but also in Europe. So we need to have both clarity on when you can use it. What I have committed to is to try to seek a ban on PFAS in consumer products. Then we have the ECHA process that has started, and they are really working hard. And I have asked them to work very hard, because we need it as soon as possible. And exactly what will come after that I don't know.
And at the same time, we know, and NGOs have been reporting, that there is already very intense lobbying taking place around the Commission to avoid having this ban. So that may be a reason why there were no strong commitments here. I mean, the Commissioner wants to have clarity on certain essential uses. Clarity, we don't know if in reality will mean exemptions.
Yeah.
But she talked about, for example, medical uses, clarity for digital and green transition. And of course, if there are specific exemptions for given purposes in cases where there's really no other way, that's one thing. But if we start generalizing exemptions if the sector didn't make an effort yet to actually shift from PFAS to another type of materials, then it's a problem, and then we may not see a concrete ban or an ambitious enough ban.
Mm-hmm. So today we're, as we said before, we got a leak, but today is the real thing. It's the real clean industrial deal at a time where there doesn't really seem to be any momentum for tougher green policies. Once the document is out, what are you looking at? What's the first thing that you will be looking forward to reading?
I'll be looking forward to the Acceleration Act and the faster permitting, both for renewable projects and for critical raw materials. Because I think that in this current moment of a race to critical raw materials, a race to produce clean energy, this is really the moment to hold politicians to their words when they talk about the compatibilization of competitiveness with environmental protection. It will be the moment to see if environmental rules are really enforced and whether they are not slashed down any further. And here, it's also the moment to see which commissioner is Jessica Roswall going to be. Is she going to be the commissioner that flexibilizes any attempt to boost the economy?
Mm-hmm.
Or is she going to be the one who makes sure that environment protection will still be respected?
And from your time with her, which way do you think she's leaning right now?
So in my view, this is really the moment for the environment commissioner to be a strong figure that doesn't easily give in to all flexibilities that favor an economy boost, but that ensures that such boost is really on the ground, avoiding pollution and further destruction of nature. Whether she's going to be this person, I don't know. There are some worries that she's too close to the industry.
Also due to her political affiliation, right? The EPP has a certain conservative stance on the environment.
Exactly. So it remains to be seen. But yeah, it's the moment to see if she's a person chosen to back all economy-prone decisions or if she will keep a strong environmental stance that we really need right now.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
This was Euractiv's podcast, Today in the EU. Sound design by Miriam Sáenz de Tejada, research and production by Charles Cohen. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news and sign up for our newsletters. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and your favorite streaming platforms. Don't forget to subscribe and give us a review. It will really help us spread the word about our work. See you tomorrow. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.